And 1 out of every 9 people living in the United States was born abroad, and therefore, by definition, is also an immigrant. This is the highest level of percentage of foreign-born people in the population since 1920, the end of the last wave, when people were coming from Southern Europe and Eastern Europe, for the most part. And at that time, there were major anti-immigrant movements because people felt threatened. There's all these people who speak different languages. They refuse to speak English. They cook smelly food, and all the other complaints that, I'm telling you, they existed back then. You go back to the newspapers, the editorials, and they were much more open about the racism and the discrimination and how they're going to dilute our culture and the rest of it. So we have these 12 million people. Half of them came in without papers, half of them came in with visitor papers, and then they overstayed. And basically, every single one of them is working. One myth, and the title of the talk today is Myths, Lies, and Urban Legends about immigrants and immigration. Because I find, there's just all kinds of misunderstandings, and that's my hope here today is to clear some of those up. Now, of those 12 million, just pretty much basically all of them are working. There's a fairly small percentage who are children, a fairly small percentage who are stay-at-home spouses, but they didn't come here to hang out on a corner at exit 8. They didn't come here to get on welfare. In fact, they cannot get on welfare. Okay, it is illegal. And if a welfare worker gives them welfare, that welfare worker and that immigrant both go to jail for a very long time. Okay, they have come here to work. So essentially, we have 12 million people who are working. Now, arguably, if they're working, by definition, the economy needs them. I mean, an employee, there's jobs, there's cutting-edge production jobs, and then there's, and then at the other end of the spectrum, there's gold-bricking jobs, where really just someone's sitting behind a desk, they're not really doing anything. Well, no employer is going to hire an undocumented immigrant for a gold-bricking job, okay? They're not, and if it's a job they don't really need, they're not going to take the risk of hiring an undocumented immigrant. They are only hiring them because they really need them. So here's this, big chunk of our economy that is being run. As a matter of fact, I said 4% of our population is undocumented immigrants, 5% of our workforce is, because they are here to work. Unlike a large portion of our native population, which is not working because they're retired, or they're taking care of kids, or they're too old, or they're too young. Immigrants coming here tend to be prime working age, 16 to 45 years old. So the economy needs it. Now, so what are the two big problems with immigration law? Number one, for all practical purposes, there's no way for 99 out of 100 of those 12 million people to come here legally, because there is no work visa for all those jobs that they're doing. Okay? So they come here illegally. They come here without papers, and they come with papers, and then they overstay. So our economy needs them, but there's no way for them to come in legally. They come in, they don't have a problem finding a job. And while there's a lot of screaming and yelling about that gosh darn immigrant, deport him, what is he doing here, he broke the laws and the rest of it, you don't hear a lot of screaming about that gosh darn employer, he's got all these employees working for him, they're not documented, fine him, stick him in jail, and the rest of it, which is sort of interesting because if you really focused on the employers, well, they would get rid of the employees. A big chunk of our economy would go down. Those employers would start screaming bloody murder. The hotels, the landscapers, the construction companies, etc. And very quickly, Congress would reverse and then create some way to fix these two problems. So A, there would be a way for people to come legally to do the jobs we need. Okay, and I want to make it very clear. I'm not open borders. I'm an American. I want as many workers as we can use to make our economy as strong as possible without hurting Americans. Okay, the other problem with the immigration law is now these 12 million people are here, and you got more dribbling in all the time, and there's no way for them to legalize. Now, basically there's two main paths to get legal permanent residency. A lot of people think you go from being an immigrant to getting your citizenship. That's not true. There's this whole ugly duckling stage called green cardville, or legal permanent residency. In other words, you go from being somebody outside the country or being somebody inside the country. You have to apply for a green card. You have to wait several years, usually 5 years. During those 5 years, you better keep your nose clean. You better declare all your income tax returns. You better show that you have good moral character. You better learn English to read, write, and speak at a certain level, something like 5th grade or something like that. And then, if you also learn enough about the history and civics of the United States, George Washington and the Constitution and the rest of it, and you pass the exam, then you can finally become a citizen. Okay, so let's imagine that we have a group of 100 undocumented immigrants. Of that 100 undocumented immigrants, 90 of them don't even have the first step of what you need to get a green card. In order to get a green card, essentially, there's a bunch of different categories, but by far the two biggest, 99% of the people getting green cards are getting it, either through a potential employer who sponsors them, or a qualifying family member, which doesn't include grandparents, etc. We're talking about spouse, parent, kids, brother. So, out of 100 potential undocumented immigrants, 90 of them do not have a potential employer who wants to do papers for them, and don't have a potential family member who can do papers for them. So 90% of them don't even have what they need to get off the starting line. Of the other 10, let's just say all 10 of those have either a family member who can do papers for them or an employer who can do papers for them. And now here is where you have the problem. Up until, from 1953, when the Immigration Act was passed, 52-53, up until, even right until now, the law says, if you are here illegally, you came in over the border, or you came with papers and they expired. If you are here illegally, and you have a potential employer or family member to sponsor you, with certain narrow exceptions, you can start the paperwork here, but starting the paperwork doesn't get you anywhere. So you got to finish the paperwork to get any kind of in-hand green card and the rest of the benefits. In order to get the green card, you have to leave the United States and present yourself at the United States consulate back in your home country. That could be Bogota, that could be Beijing, that could be Berlin. All right, that's what the law said since the early 50s. But in 1996, after the 1994 election, when the Republicans won both houses of Congress, and they did their contract with America, etc., they made immigration, they threw a bunch of wrenches into the system. The system wasn't working all that well before, but they really threw a box full of wrenches into the system. And the one wrench I want to draw your attention to is a law that says, if you've been illegally in the United States for more than a year, if you crossed the border in a year past, or you came with papers, the papers expired in a year past, if you leave the United States for whatever reason whatsoever, including to present yourself back at the consulate to finish up the green card papers, you can't go back for 10 years. Let's put it together. For most immigrants, if you have an employer or family member, if you're ready to roll, to get a green card you have to leave. If you leave, you can't get a green card. So the two big problems with today's immigration law are, for all practical purposes, for the vast majority of immigrants, for all those jobs above agricultural and below computer program, there's no way to come legally. Nevertheless, our economy is screaming for them, and when they come, they get a job. And on the other hand, once they're here illegally, there's no way for them to legalize. Now, in every other situation where someone has violated the law, be it civil or be it criminal, when somebody violates the law, you have to have some sort of consequence or the law doesn't mean anything. Okay? Here in the United States, you have a civil violation of the law, you have to pay a fine. And you have to make right. If you don't pay your taxes, you got to pay what you owe, plus the interest, plus penalties. Okay? You commit a crime, you have to pay a fine, or you go to jail, etc. Okay?